The Roaring Twenties were a time of great change, not only in society and technology, but also politically. The Great War was over, and many changes were arising with the turn of the decade, especially for the Canadian government.
The former Prime Minister of Canada, Sir Robert Borden, had resigned from his position after the war, leaving the new Prime Minister, Arthur Meighen, in charge of a country that was torn apart by strikes.
The situation of French Canadians was at its worst, as the 20s brought upon an increasing sense of alienation amongst the French people of Canada. Still furious about the conscription crisis in 1917, the French Canadians grew ever more restless and felt their position in Canada was shifting to a minority.
A man by the name of Abbé Lionel Groulx was in charge of a group known as the Action Nationale. The group supported a movement which would bring upon a change in the status of French-speaking Canadians by protecting their culture in Quebec, fighting for French-Canadian ownership of large industries, and supporting their rural life and traditional values.
Another group of Canadians who felt alienated were the Maritime provinces. Government policies favored the growth of businesses in central Canada as opposed to the east, where the Maritimes were struggling to cope with the decline in demand for maritime products, such as fish and coal, as well as increasingly high freight rates, which made it very difficult for businesses in the east to prosper. These tough times drove many maritime manufacturers to migrate westward to central Canada, where the market for their purpose was vast. Unemployment in Canada was skyrocketing due to the tough economic times, and industries were slowly collapsing.
A maritime rights movement was enacted in order to try and persuade the government to look into the issues the people were faced with and ultimately pass laws which would help stabilize the economic situation in the Maritimes. However, despite the Royal Commission set up to investigate the problems and the recommendations they gave to the government, little was done to change the situation, and the minor changes made were not enough to make an impact.
The strain of the war, however, was not limited to the Maritimes. It also extended out to the west, where prairie farmers were facing tough economic times as well. The world market for wheat had completely collapsed, and Europe could not afford to buy Canadian wheat after the war. Many of these farmers believed that the cause of their economic hardships lay in the fact that their costs were constantly rising. High tariffs made farm equipment more expensive, and high freight rates made the cost to transport their products another unmanageable expense. Although the prairie farmers had been protesting for these issues to be resolved long before the turn of the century, no action was made by the government.
In 1920, many farmers banded together to create the National Progressives, which was a federal political party which sought to represent the farmers of Canada in their campaign to acquire lower freight rates and tariffs. In addition, they believed voters should have the right to propose laws, as well as the ability to recall MPs who were not doing their job representing the concerns of the province. The National Progressives surprisingly won 65 seats in the federal election of 1921, which was second only to the Liberals.
Members of the National Progressive, however, would often argue amongst each other and could not come to a conclusion on many major issues, resulting in the slow division of the party. Although the group did not stand very long, it emphasized the fact that the two-party system used in Canada was not enough to represent the concerns of the various groups throughout the country.
The federal election of 1921 was a turning point in the Canadian government's rule over Canada, as the victor was William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was undoubtedly the most successful political leader of his age and would dominate the Liberal Party of Canada until his death in 1950.
Although King was very shrewd and careful, and he was extremely spiritual, even claiming to have been in contact with his dead mother and Sir Wilfrid Laurier, King won the votes of the people of Canada by doing what the people so desperately needed. He was a political figure that literally waited to make decisions until he had worked out compromises among the conflicting interests. Simply put, he listened to what the people wanted, and he found a way to resolve their concerns by making the Liberal Party's policies more acceptable for various groups across Canada, making him one of the most successful Canadian leaders of his time.
Political and regional protests were rampant all over Canada. However, with the rise of William Lyon Mackenzie, the issues were slowly being deflated, and although the problems did not cease completely, what seemed to be a downward economic spiral for many groups throughout Canada was reversed, and Canada's economic situation finally seemed to be improving.